Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the final review that we will be doing for Showdown in the Badlands. Now that all the cards are out, we've had BlizzCon, where there's a bunch of exciting things revealed, including Reno, the Lone Ranger, the neutral hero card, who we will be getting to at the end of the review. But a lot of stuff that we have not yet touched on. So let's get to it, shall we? Last time we had only seen a couple of hunter cards, so let's get going with the rest of them. Starting with, boom, Saddle Up. 3-cost spell. Give your minions Death Rattle, summon a random beast that costs 3 or less. This is interesting for decks that are just kind of filling the board. We had seen, I think we'd seen as of the last one. Maybe we hadn't. Maybe we saw it just before I left. But the 1-cost spell that makes 2 1/1 stealth beasts. This one, Sneaky Snakes, just one card that makes 2 things for 1 mana. Very, very powerful alongside something like Saddle Up, where, this is kind of like a Soul of the Forest type effect, right? Soul of the Forest gives you 2/2 treants out of Druid. Obviously, Druid is better at making, a variety of token creatures in a lot of instances, but there are, ways to take advantage of this, like I said, with things like the Sneaky Snakes, or just, other things that make a bunch of small minions. Very good protection against mass removal, and, obviously beasts have various synergies in Hunter, good synergies with things that, like, infuse cards from Murder Castle Nathria, stuff like that. As to whether there's, like, a home for it, right now is unclear because there's not that many things that kind of encourage you to play a go wide hunter style deck. But if there are, this is a very good insurance policy as well as way to potentially even upgrade your small things, such as the Sneaky Snakes, into more powerful minions. Next up, we have Camouflage Mount. 4 costs, give a minion +3/+3, and a random bonus effect. When it dies, summon a chameleon. So we saw all the mount cards back in the day that were like, give a minion this buff, and when it dies, you get a minion that has those stats and this buff. So this is 4 costs, give something +3/+3. When it dies, you get a 3/3 that has the same bonus effect. This being things like Taunt, Lifesteal, Wind Fury, etc., etc. It is a little, because it is random. It is harder to kind of plan with this than something like, say, a ramming mount that they previously had. I'm a little questionable on just how good this is. It is like a powerful effect, but it's hard to plan when you want to use it in quite the same way as the old mounts. Obviously, being able to hit something like Wind Fury can be really, really gross, but you don't even know until you play it what you're going to get, so it makes it, pretty difficult to gauge just what the board is going to look like, once you actually have resolved your Camouflage Mount, because you don't know what it is. 4 is a lot of mana, too. So this one I'm a little bit lower on than the previous mount effects, which does not bode super well. Next up, we have 10-Gallon Hat. 2 costs spell, draw a minion, give it +1/+1, and Death Rattle, get a 10-Gallon Hat. This card, I think, is very powerful. You can play this in like a very spell-heavy hunter deck, and have a relatively limited pool of minions that you can give yourself the ability to draw and then continue to draw through after all of these. Obviously, it's vulnerable to silence effects, but the first time you cast it, you just get a card, right? You spend 2 to draw a minion, give it +1/+1, and an additional effect that your opponent is going to really want to silence. So that, I think, is just a very, very strong effect. Whether you're playing it in a deck that is like, just kind of mid-rangey, or you're playing it in a deck that has like specific combo pieces that, you're looking to draw. Like, imagine a, arcane hunter deck playing this to draw Haldir and Brightwing, right? Very few other minions in the deck. And it's like, okay, well, this just gives me the ability to, draw my like enabler for so many of my other cards. If you have like that, and like, say just the minions that give you the bonus spell stuff, or like maybe like the Titan or whatever, I think it is just a very powerful card. It's effectively, targeted card draw. And maybe that specific example isn't necessarily great, but there are lots of other examples of places where it's like you have, a deck that specifically wants to draw like one thing. Like, you can even play like Highlander Hunter and, just have like the Highlander dude who you give a buff to with this. And even outside of that, this is just a good card as long as you can spend the 2 mana to draw a card and not fall massively behind on the board, which is the big challenge for Hunter. So I think this is just a really strong card that maybe has a variety of possible homes. Next up, speaking of things that are good to put a hat on, it turns out that giving your Skeletal Cow a hat is really powerful. 3 costs 3/3 with Death Rattle if it has 4 or more attack, summon a bovine skeleton. So you can just play the hat, draw your skeleton. Now you play your 4/4 for 3, and when it dies, you get this back. And if you can buff it again, you get this back. So, obviously there are a number of cards within the Hunter pool in this particular set that benefit very well from hand buffs that the hat can give you. And this is one we already talked about last time, but Feldura in the Lost, hand buff on this, if you're playing like a Highlander Hunter deck, you hat into this, and suddenly, this just wipes your opponent's board. It's a Yeti that fights everything and lives, and gives you your hat when he's done to go find something else. And another powerful thing, Silver Serpent, 2/3 rush poisonous with quick draw, gain immune this turn. If you hat into this with 5 mana, I'm just going to keep using the hat as an example, but quick draw is if you draw this turn or it enters your hand this turn, a very powerful thing to discover if you do have beast discovery things and such. But yeah, this is just like a pretty solid like removal effect. Obviously not something you want to keep in your mulligan because the quick draw makes it really powerful. But even outside of that, it's just like 3 mana, kill something, can be a very strong effect for a Hunter that's looking to punch through a big taunt. Also just, again, a very, very powerful thing to potentially discover. And then we talked very briefly about this. Sneaky Stakes, 1-cost spell, summon 2/1/1 stakes with stealth. Just a powerful early game tool for a beast style of Hunter deck. Or again, it is a spell that makes minions, which makes it potentially very powerful with the 10-gallon hat to allow you to find specific stuff without giving up on early game tempo, because you still have ways to play for the early game even without minions in those slots. And then another powerful card, look at this guy, the snake with a hat. He already has a hat. He's telling you, put this into your deck with 10-gallon hat. Battlecry and Death Rattle, summon a random beast with cost equal to this minion's attack. So any number of ways that you have to hand buff it means that this has a battle cry that gives you something quite powerful. By itself, it's just giving you a 2-drop. But if you hat into it or have other forms of hand buff, it can really get quite large. Because this is a battle cry effect, so the minions on the board, if you have like things like Direwolf Alpha, you can play it next to those to get the additional buff. But overall, I think this is a very powerful like tempo card for a mid-range style beast Hunter deck in particular. And the more ways that you have to buff it, which again, things like hat or this guy who we saw before, the 2-cost 1/2 Death Rattle draw beast, give all minions in your hand +1/+1. More things that care about hand buff. Very powerful ways to interact with Spurfang. And the final Hunter card, Starshooter. This is a 4-cost 2/3 weapon. If your hero attacks, get an Arcane Shot. Probably not a card that is particularly compelling in most decks, but in a deck that cares about playing spells, cares about arcane spells. This has the potential to be quite strong. It's a lot of damage, right? You're obviously not getting just the 12 damage for 4 mana because you have to cast the other arcane shots, but it's effectively giving you 12 mana, or 12 damage rather, over the course of the 3 attacks that you get with it. Anything that increases durability or whatever also can make it pretty strong. More ways to trigger things that care about playing spells, etc., etc., etc. So it obviously won't be affected by your arcane buff effects unless you are attacking with it and keeping them in your hand, and then play your Farstrider. Is it Farstrider? Not Farstrider. Farseeker? I forget. Anyway, the one that buffs the spells in your hand, or Haldurin that buffs the spells in your hand and deck, you need to have actually gotten the attacks in with this first, so it doesn't just like carry over those buffs to them. But that can just lead to it being even more damage for your mana. Next up, we have Mage. We went over pretty much all of the Mage spells previously, if I recall correctly, but there is one new Mage card that was revealed, which is Mesadune the Fractured. It's a 6-cost, 6/5 elemental With Battlecry, draw an elemental, split it into 2 halves. Those of you who are regular viewers of my channel probably know that I've been experimenting a lot with Elemental Mage, which I think is, a deck that has some potential, and in particular has some potential with some of the new cards from this set. This doesn't seem like it's necessarily a card that is great in Elemental Mage in the sense of a deck that has a bunch of elementals and wants to play them each turn, because splitting something like a Flame Revenant or whatever is not that appealing. There's certainly a lot of powerful Battlecry elementals like Unchained Gladiator or Tainted Remnant that would be powerful with this. But it feels like this might be at its best in a deck that is specifically looking to split like gigantic elementals like Neptulon or Ragnaros, and giving you, like 2 4-cost 4/4s that each have the Ragnaros ability to shoot 8 damage or something, or 2 Neptulons that each come with their arms, because the only things that are impacted by this are the casting cost and the stats of the minion. So this has, a lot of power in very specific circumstances, and I think is the sort of thing that you're going to see a lot of people complaining about when they get run over by double Ragnaros or multiple Neptulons early in the game. And while it is not a collectible card, there is another relevant Mage card, which is the Azurite Hawk. So this may look like it's a completely overpowered card, but it is not a card that you can just put into your deck. This is the legendary Excavate reward for Mage. For those who may not have kept up with exactly how Excavate works, each time you Excavate, you go sort of 1 rarity deeper and get a slightly more powerful effect, or perhaps significantly more powerful effect than the previous time. If you Excavate 4 times, you will get a legendary reward in the classes that have access to them, which are the classes that specifically focus on the Excavate mechanic. This is the Mage one, the Azurite Hawk. So you Excavate 4 times, and here you go. You get a 4-cost 5/5 with Battlecry. Get a random Titan. It costs 1. So this is very clearly a super powerful payoff. You're getting a very efficient minion by itself. Obviously, late enough in the game that you're going to excavate it 4 times. Pretty unlikely that having a 4-cost 5/5 is that important. But obviously, getting a Titan that costs 1 could be an absolutely massive swing. You could get Yogg and give people flashbacks of when they could just play it for 0 mana. You can get, Sargeras. There's all kinds of super powerful Titan effects that you have access to. So, obviously, this is the style of card that I do really enjoy. Things that, and mechanics generally that I enjoy with Excavate, that give you, alternate ways that the games will play out based on specifically what you get from your, cards that are generated from outside the game. And, Azurite Hawk is certainly kind of at the top of that list as far as, making things very interesting by giving you not only a bunch of stuff as you get to it, but then, hey, look, random Titan, whatever could it be, and figuring out how to best operate from that point forward with what you got from that effect. So very cool, and definitely something that encourages me to try to experiment with Excavate decks in Mage. All right, next up we have Paladin. We had not seen much of when we did our previous section of the review, so we've got a lot to look at today. Let's start with Lawful Longarm, which is clearly an indication of a sort of big hand style Paladin. 5-cost 1/5 with Rush and Lifesteal. With Battlecry, gain +1 attack for each card in your hand. Prior to this, we haven't really seen like a Paladin style strategy that really wants to have a full hand. And frankly, Paladin is a class that does not have a lot of card draw. So, we're obviously going to have to see some of the cards within this set itself in order to actually enable this. But I do enjoy these types of cards and these sort of types of mechanics that lend you to want to do different things than a class previously has. Sometimes they do sort of fall through because there isn't enough motivation to actually go in that direction or enough support. But there are some pretty cool cards in addition to this. This is, I think, a pretty solid card. And one of the things about this, Rush Lifesteal, is a pretty good combination of effects to put on a card when you're going to want to use your early game playing things that probably aren't quite as impactful as they otherwise would be, because you're trying to fill up your hand and generate additional resources. So it is a combination of abilities that makes a lot of sense for the rest of what the strategy seems to want you to do. Next up, we have Lay Down the Law. This card is super powerful. 2-cost, tradable. Set a minion's attack and health to 1. With Quick Draw, then deal 1 damage to it. So this, I think, is a really, really powerful card. Obviously, like just setting something to 1/1 is a pretty strong effect to begin with. You know, we have seen that like attached to minions. That is obviously more powerful to a certain degree, but this being attached to a tradable card means that in matchups where this isn't good, you know, you can just kind of send it back. And that's one of the things that's always somewhat problematic with cards like Aldor Peacekeeper, or Class Action Lawyer is, you know, you're playing in matchups where they aren't really doing that much, so they just kind of sit in your hand. As tradable, it's like, okay, you know, has my opponent played their Titan yet? No, we'll send it back. You know, are they, you know, potentially going to play it soon? No. Okay, send it back. If they are, well, I can sit on it, or I can trade it and hope to draw it so that we can kill it immediately as well. Yeah, the quick draw effect alongside tradable is especially powerful because, you know, you can just put it back into your deck. And there are effects that we will take a look at, like, let's find him, this guy, who I obviously love. This is a 2/1 Divine Shield Dragon, Death Rattle, draw a Holy Spell. So one of the problems with an effect like Draw a Holy Spell in a strategy like, say, Dragon Paladin, where you want to draw a high density of minions, or rather want to have a high density of minions, is you run out of Holy Spells. If you have a tradable Holy Spell, like the Late on the Law, that means that you're almost never going to run into the situation, well, I drew them and, you know, I can't get my Holy Spell from this because, well, you just trade it back into your deck. So I think this card, and especially in combination with Late on the Law, is super strong. One of the big things that has always been troublesome when I have, you know, attempted to build Dragon Paladin decks has been the early game. You don't really have very many great options in the early turns of the game. If you are trying to play a pretty dragon dense deck to enable your various synergies. Most recently, I've been messing around with like a dragon mech hybrid style of deck. This gives you another very powerful early game minion in a dragon deck that, you know, not only is just like a Divine Shield 2-power minion, but also has additional value attached that feels extremely strong. On the flip side, Showdown, 2-cost spell. Both players summon 3 2/2 outlaws, give yours rush. This is a card that by itself doesn't really do very much. You know, you're spending 2 mana and you both get 3/3s with rush that you're like, okay, I guess I kill yours. That obviously not very good. However, this can be very powerful with, say, Crusader Aura, right? You have Crusader Aura and you're like, okay, I'll play Showdown. We each get 3/3s, but mine kill yours and stay around with 1 health. Or, you know, you have Amitis. Okay, I'll play this and I'll kill your stuff. Maybe you're looking, you know, to play against a deck with resurrect effects. Okay, now I'll trade these off and completely screw over your resurrection pool. But I think this is not a card that like stands out as like, you know, okay, well, this is a card that goes into this deck, right? Like this is powerful and, like, you know, supports this particular strategy. This mostly feels like a card that's going to be like interesting in specific situations where it's discovered, and is unlikely to go into very many decks outside of sort of tech situations like you're trying to disrupt your opponent's resurrection pool. So it's cool, you know, the fact that it's you know, the Showdown, but you know, is certainly not a standalone card that is particularly powerful on its own. Next up, Spirit of the Badlands. 3-cost, 3/4 Undead Beast. Battle cry: if your deck has no duplicates, get a permanent Mirage. So the Mirage is a card that copies a minion in your deck that you can play that turn. This card is super cool. You know, this is like a reasonably statted early game minion you can just play that gives you like value for the rest of the game. It's just super cool. You know, I feel like there needs to be really powerful incentives to play Highlander. You know, we saw like in the last core set, not the most recent one, but the last one, that like Reno came back, right? And Reno was like the reason that people played Highlander for a while. And it wasn't by itself back in the day. It wasn't actually that good, right? People like Reno decks were kind of a meme until Kazakus came out, and it was like, okay, Reno and Kazakus, this combination is powerful. And then there were like, you know, the individual cards for the specific classes. Then there was like Zephyrus as sort of the second round of Highlander cards. You need really powerful individual cards in order to actually encourage people to play the Highlander mechanic, because otherwise they're just making their decks much less consistent, frequently playing an overall lower power level of card in order to justify supporting it. And this feels like something that to me is like exciting enough to be like, wow, I want to build Highlander Paladin. And then of course every class has the option of Reno, who we'll get to later. Next up, we have Living Horizon, a 10 cost 4/6 Divine Shield Taunt Elemental, costs 1 less for each other card in your hand. Paladin elementals that cost 1 less based on a condition seems to be a major theme with this and Light Ray. But this is obviously, the mountain giant of the big hand Paladin stuff. This feels like the more powerful of the two between this and the 5-drop rush guy in terms of, hey, I want to try and build, my deck to do this particular thing. The specific like tools to actually make this work are like a little bit unclear to me still. You definitely need to have things that are filling up your hand. Obviously there is, well, let's just show the legendary here, which is clearly that Badlands Bandits. So this 6 cost spell, get 8 3/2 bandits with bonus effects. Any that can't fit into your hand are summoned instead. So this is the just the swath of potential minion abilities that we've seen on lots of things so far. But this giving you a bunch of stuff. Obviously, it is at its best if you have a hand that is largely full, but it also supports filling your hand, right? Like if your hand is full, it gets to put a bunch of stuff into play. If your hand is not full, it gets to push a bunch of stuff into your hand and allow you to use your tools that key off of that as well. So this is this is not a particularly, I think, potent card from just a like minion perspective. Something that's just like, hey, put a bunch of stuff into play that are all 3/2s for 6 mana. That's not going to be that effective at that stage of the game, right? But it being the enabler for the other cards, as well as like something that in some matchups can just be very, very powerful tempo tool, I do think is pretty compelling for that strategy. Next up, we have Deputization Aura, 3 cost holy spell. Your leftmost minion has +3 attack and lifesteal. Last 3 turns. So this is, an interesting card for decks that are not, Crusader Aura decks, right? The Aura effects, I think, are pretty strong. Just generally, they're things that give you, some amount of power over time. This is interesting in the sense that, like, say you're playing like a mid-range deck, say you're playing, I don't know, Dragon Paladin. Crusader Aura isn't that good if your deck is not playing a ton of stuff out, right? Crusader Aura is great for playing it, if you're playing a deck that plays a bunch of Silverhand recruits, that plays like Boogie down into Divine Shield minions. It just has a big board a lot of the time. This is good if you're playing like 1 or 2 things each turn. And, like think about like Apotheosis from Priest, right? That gave you like a big burst of lifesteal. Even if you just got 1 attack off, this is 3 turns of that. You can use it potentially with rush minions and or charge minions, placing them to the left repeatedly. You can like put a taunt minion there that your opponent has to attack through. I think it's just a very potent card. You can play this with Ragnaros, right? Like you have all kinds of stuff that you can use this with, and I think it's interesting how it makes you think about positioning, and also just like giving this sort of repeated life gain to again a deck like Dragon Paladin, right? That really does have the ability / need to both sustain its life total in certain matchups, but as well as generate additional threat against opponents who are able to kill your largest things on the board. So I think it's sweet, and you can use this with like Astalor even, right? Like think about how Astalor works with what was it, the Demon Hunter guy who like, or no, was it Demon Hunter? Yeah, it's the Demon Hunter guy who like guys to the left have rush, guys to the right have lifesteal. You could put your Astalor there. You could play your Astalor leftmost. If it's your leftmost minion, boom, it's got lifesteal while it fires off and nukes your opponent for 16 or whatever, and now suddenly you're at full life. So pretty cool card, and I like that it gives options for auras to decks that are not like swarm decks. And lastly, we have Holy Cowboy. 3 cost 4/3. Your next holy spell costs 2 less. Important to note, not your next holy spell this turn. This is your next holy spell. So this can be used to play a expensive holy spell earlier in the game, such as Garden's Grace, such as what's it? The 7 cost one that shoots. Is that one? I forget. Completely blanking on the name of the thing that shoots like 5 times or whatever. Divine Toll. Yeah, that's the holy spell. It's called Divine. It's got to be the holy spell. Be able to play that for 5. Probably not how it's going to be used. I don't know that this is going to be used. But basically, anything that offers mana, like discounts, deductions, is a powerful card, almost universally, right? Like even if you're not like using it to ramp into a big holy spell like Divine Toll, if you're just using this to play Hand of Vidal, right? Play Crusader Aura for 2. Any of those are powerful to just get 2 mana discount. We're talking like, a Lightning Bloom Old Innervate level of acceleration for your sort of multi-spell turns. And that could be a really big deal. I don't know if it's worth playing a 3 cost 4/3, but anything that involves manipulating your mana is pretty universally worth paying attention to, and this is one of those cards. Next up, we have Rogue. Let's start with Stick Up. 1 cost, discover a quick draw card from another class. So 2 really important things here. 1, this is obviously a really efficient version of a discover something from another class, costing just 1. But specifically quick draw, if you discover something that turn, it gets the quick draw effect. So this could discover the things that cost less mana, that have crazy bonus effects. Like this gets all of them that turn. I'd have to go through and look at every single quick draw effect, but things like Dehydrate, I think that was cost 1 or something for quick draw. There's all kinds of just really powerful cost reductions and bonus effects from quick draw. We saw the Hunter thing one earlier. That's like the poisonous immune, or rather poisonous rush gets immune if you quick draw it. There's just lots of effects with quick draw that are pretty huge bonuses, and I think it's interesting how you decide you want to play Stick Up, right? Do you just play it when you have free mana in the early turns of the game, or do you hold on to it to try and get max value from the card so you can use it that turn, so you can get the powerful quick draw effect? So I think this is a really neat card, both from a deck building perspective, what actually wants this, as well as a gameplay perspective, how do you actually choose to play it? Next up, we have Dart Throw. Throw 2 2-damage darts at random enemy minions. If both hit the same minion, get a coin. So this is either 2 cost 4 damage to your opponent's single minion, if they have a single minion. Also can hit stealth minions, which is quite relevant in a world of mech rogue and things like that. Or, just AoE opposing minions. But yeah, I think this is an interesting card, especially considering the tools that Rogue has to take advantage of coins in this set. So I think this is just a card along the lines, obviously not nearly as powerful from a temper perspective, but along the lines of a Serrated Bone Spike that can give you a tempo advantage, not necessarily an immediate one, but one that you can bank with the coin. So I do think this card seems quite powerful. Next up, we have Antique Flinger, a 4 cost 5/4 battlecry. If you've excavated twice, destroy an enemy minion. So Rogue kind of naturally has the best ability to take advantage of the sort of neutral Kobold Excavate 2-drop because of Shadow Step and Break Dance. So they can very quickly, I think, get their Excavate on. So if they're looking for, hey, I am going to kill an enemy minion, this is a pretty easy thing to get on. The question is, how good is 4 cost Body with kill a minion attached? Really depends on the metagame. If the metagame is one with stuff like Mech Rogue, where there's going to be an individual large minion you really want to kill, the card's great, right? If the metagame is one with stuff like, Rainbow Mage, where there's always just a bunch of stuff into play, less so. Speaking of excavating, Drilly the Kid, a 4 cost 4/3 mech with Battlecry, Quick Draw, and Death Rattle. Excavate a treasure. So this is obviously the top tier excavate card for Rogue, talking about the ability to use things with Shadow Step. If you play this, Shadow Step it, it is now the turn it entered your hand. You get the quick draw effect if you play it again. So this is gonna excavate stuff real quick. So I think Excavate Rogue slash Thief Rogue both have some really exciting stuff. This being, of course, one of them. Obviously, like this is just the enabler to get the Excavate stuff. We will get to the exactly what the Excavate card does, because there actually is some overlap with Thief Rogue. So maybe those end up kind of being a similar strategy overall. But this is, I think, the most efficient Excavate card that is around. So obviously, between this and the fact that Rogue has bounce effects, it does feel very strongly that they will be the class best suited to excavate quickly if that's what you're looking for. Speaking of, Bloodrock Company Shovel. One cost 1/3 with Death Rattle, excavate a treasure. If you're looking to excavate as much as possible, this is obviously something that helps you do it. It does feel like you'd almost rather this had less durability. In fact, not even almost. Like I think that you'd prefer this were a like 1/2, or even a 1/1. Maybe not a 1/1, but like being able to get the excavate off quickly feels like it's more valuable than having an extra swing of a 1 attack weapon. Maybe you want to play like poisons on it, and having a 3 durability weapon for 1 can do that. Give you a little bit of crossover appeal between a poison deck and an excavate deck. But overall, I think it's more likely to just sort of want to be a card that shows up in excavate decks. You could just play this in turn 1 and hero power in turn 2, and that does break it if you have nothing else better to do. All right, next up we have another rogue legendary, which is boom, Velorok Windblade. 3 cost 3/3. While this is in your hand, play 3 cards from other classes to reveal Velorok's true form. And what is that form? Holy shit, he's the dragon! 3 cost 3/6 with charge. After this attacks, discover a card from another class. It costs 3 less. It will come as no surprise to anyone that I love this card. Not only do I love just sort of Thief Rogue style stuff in general, because I find that cards and decks that allow you to play a different sort of game all the time are just more fun, especially when you're playing hours and hours and hours a day like I do. And this one, it's also a dragon, right? It's a dragon that gets you, not only it encourages you to play stuff from other classes, but also gets you even more of them, and they're discounted. So I love this. It's just, it's super cool. Works really well with like Shadow Step and such, because it has charge, so you can just keep getting more cards and getting damage in. And again, charge in 2023. This is a mechanic we don't really see very often, but this can give you a very powerful finisher, as well as ability to generate value, do other cool things. Yeah, he's a dragon with a cowboy hat. How do you beat that? So, but yeah, I've talked a lot about how there are a variety of incentives to play thief style decks, and I think this is the strongest of them, and I'm very excited to try it out. All right, next up we have Wishing Well, a 5 cost 0/7. After you play a coin, get a random legendary minion from another class and set its cost to 1. So I mentioned earlier they're the cards that want to play around with coins. I think this is a cool one. Having things that generate coins and be able to turn them into legendaries that cost 1 is sweet. Tess is still in the core set, right? We haven't really seen Tess used for just about anything recently. And I think a lot of that is just, there's not like necessarily grindy value stuff. Even the control decks are things like Odin Warrior and Rainbow Mage that nuke you. They will likely still be that, which is a little bit unfortunate for wanting to do crazy grindy test stuff. But, being able to play 1 cost legendaries off of this and force your opponent to deal with a 0/7 for 5, as long as you have, the ability to generate a good number of coins, is pretty sweet. So certainly the sort of card that I'm going to try experimenting with. I don't necessarily think it's great, but it certainly seems fun. And speaking of cards that give you coins, Bounty Wrangler. 3 cost 3/4 with quick draw or combo, get a coin. So I think that it's unclear to me looking at this, whether you can potentially get 2 coins if you combo it the turn that you add it to your hand. My guess is or means no, that you only can get 1, right? That if you like Shadow Step this and play it, you only get 1 coin, which is a little bit unfortunate. But again, it's not like 100% clear. I think it's max 1. Either way, something that like a 3/4 that generates a coin when you have specific uses for these coins, um, such as wishing well, I think is pretty sweet, and being able to you know like use it, shadow step it, and be able to get even whichever you decide to use, whether it's the quick draw or the combo to get coins that continue supporting that is pretty sweet. But yeah, I think if it would trigger off of both, I feel like it would say and. So my guess is that the best you can do is one coin, which is again a little disappointing, but understandable. Next, triple sevens. Deal 7 damage to a minion. Draw 7 cards. Brent, we hardly knew you, right? So this is clearly something that you wanna prep out and suddenly ruin everything about this card. So then it costs 5 and does 7, draws 7. I mean, I'm curious if we do see this as something that people play in decks that are looking to have a lot of card draw and play out tons and tons and tons of stuff on their from their hand. Um, but what I'm mostly hoping to see is people with a full hand hit this off of their Prison of Yogg-Saron and massively, massively overdraw themselves. Next up, we have Shell Game. 3 costs, get a random epic, rare, and common card from other classes. Meh. This is, 3 cost burgle-ish. It's not cards from your opponent's deck, so they're not guaranteed to even be remotely good. Or even I guess the burgle is always just opponent's class, but more like Thought Seal. This is a 3 cost like. It's a cool card, I think, but I think that it is challenging for that to be good when you're not impacting the board at all. I'm curious if they are all from the same class, just as other classes. So I guess you could actually get them from all sorts of other classes. But it is a very powerful way to enable stuff like Ransack. But I don't know that the Ransack and the dude are necessarily which dude? This dude, whatever his name is. I keep forgetting it. Veldaruk. I don't know if those are enough to really justify the sort of full thief rogue style. I love them, but I feel like without stuff like Vendetta or Underbelly Fence, there might just not be enough tempo to really justify playing all the thief stuff in one deck. And lastly, we're talking about how the rogue class was clearly the best class at excavating. Well, this is what they get, what they can dig up. Battlecry, get 4 random spells. They've excavated 8 times. They cost 0. So obviously the expectation is that Rogue is well capable of excavating, because 8 times is a lot. That would be generating 2 Azurite Scorpions. And worth noting, there's obviously a lot of overlap here between the excavate powers and the sort of thief roguish powers, because getting random spells, these are, I assume, random spells from any class, would be my guess, considering this is random spells, not rogue spells or whatever. And, you being able to set all that up and potentially use it with Tess is super sweet. So yeah, being able to turbo excavate is definitely, alongside the various Tess, Voldrak type cards. Maybe you're not even necessarily playing a deck that is like really heavily leaning into the thief stuff, and you're just using excavate and aiming for this kind of as your like power stuff, and maybe a few other things like Voldaric in order to actually get that going. Unclear, but certainly a lot of potential moving parts that I'm excited to experiment with. Next up, we have Shaman. We saw a couple of Shaman cards, but we have quite a few more to take a look at, including what may be my favorite card in the set, Dr. Holiday. So this is the Highlander Shaman card, Doc Holiday, 4/5 for 5 with Battlecry. If your deck has no duplicates, equip the Staff of 9 Frogs. I actually didn't get an image for Staff of the 9 Frogs, but it is a 2/9 weapon that summons a progressively larger frog when you attack with it. So you can just kill your opponent with huge frogs, and that's hilarious. But yeah, like not only is it a 2/9, it is the highest durability of any weapon that they've made. It gets to do the Jade meme of summon a larger and larger frog, and yeah, it's just like the fact that you can just kill your opponent with frogs is so sweet. What you really need are more ways to play additional copies of Doc Holiday. And just beat your opponent over the head with frogs endlessly. And yeah, the frogs have taunt. So you make a 1/1 with taunt, then a 2/2 with taunt, then a 3/3 with taunt, then a 4/4 with taunt, etc., etc., etc. They just get progressively bigger, and just the idea of beating your opponent, about the head and shoulders with your frogs is just too funny to me. So we're definitely gonna have to try that. Next up, we have Scar the Catastrophe. I think we might have talked about this last time, but I'm gonna jump into it again. Um, this is a 7-cost 7/7 elemental. Battlecry, deal 1 damage to all enemies, improved by each turn in a row you've played elemental. This is a card that, more than anything else, wishes Firefly was in the core set. It is important to note that this is not the highest number of turns that you've played an elemental this game. It is number of turns in a row you've played an elemental since this turn, like back from this turn. So if last turn you played an elemental, it's 1 turn in a row. You would do 2 to everything. If you did 6 turns in a row and then skipped 1 and then played this, it would be 1 damage, which is a little weird to me. It feels very difficult without like a lot of elemental support, and it doesn't necessarily feel like Shaman has that support right now. It is not your highest streak; it is your current streak. Both this and like the Giant are kind of the same thing, which again is feels a little bit challenging to make work, especially without something like Firefly. It does feel like you're gonna run out of elementals unless you have a lot of help, but I'm hopefully wrong, because I do like the sort of like figuring out how to get the elemental chains and still be able to play your relevant minions and removal other relevant minions and removal spells and such. But right now it feels like this is probably not a card that has quite enough support to be good. Next up we have Cactus Cutter, a 2-cost Murloc for 2/2. Battlecry, draw a spell. If you cast it this turn, gain +1/+2 and taunt. Worth noting, this is just 2-cost 2/2 draw card baseline, right? That's really good. And like if you also cast your spell, it's 2-cost 3/4 with taunt, which is crazy. So I think this card is really, really, really good. I think it's quietly really good, because it's not like flashy, but it's just an extremely powerful card in kind of any Shaman deck, right? Like, just 2-cost draw a spell, unless you're like hyper aggressive and want the most efficient stats at every curve. You're, say playing Elemental Shaman and can't afford to not play an Elemental in that turn. This just feels like a like great card for basically any Shaman deck. Next we have Trusty Companion. I think we might have talked about this last time again, but regardless, 2-cost spell, give the minion +2/+3. It says minion type, draw one of that type. So, very strong card with any kind of deck that cares about your minion types. Has a bunch of the same minion type. Totems, for instance. Murloc, for instance. Elementals, for instance. Just a very, very, very good card. This card is kind of hilarious. 9 costs 4/16. Rush, Lifesteal, Mega Wind Fury. Overload 2. We had like Walking Fountain before. I love that this is just a bigger version called Walking Mountain. This is this card, like if it lives, because it has Mega Wind Fury, it's gonna beat your opponent about the head and shoulders, and they're gonna be dead. If they're playing an aggressive deck that has multiple small things, they're just gonna gain 16 life by attacking into 4 of them. I think this card is quite strong. And this is the sort of card that can be extremely strong in like a variety of decks. The fact that in a control deck, this can just be like, hey, I'm going to kill your entire board and like virtually Reno myself. Super good, right? In like a mid-range deck, it can be like, hey, I kill a couple of, maybe I kill like a thing, and then if you don't kill this really high health minion, it's just going to absolutely obliterate you. So I think it's a very strong card that I expect to see quite a bit of play. Next up, we have Amphibious Elixir. Restore 5 health, discover a spell. Nature. Like it is healing that doesn't cost you a card. It is a discover effect. I do love discover effects. It is specifically discovering spells. There are a lot of awkward to use Shaman spells that do not necessarily apply to wide variety of decks. But I do think it is certainly a card that if you're looking for healing effects, a heal effect that does not require basically a costing a card, can be very good. It's a lot like Renew, but Priest had Renew costs 1 mana, and Priest had a lot of ways to take advantage of the healing that Shaman does not. Next up, Giant Tumbleweed. First of all, this literally summons a Tumbleweed minion. Secondly, this is just a powerful card. You know, it's a like 6 cost, or rather 7 cost AoE, deals 6 to all minions, summon a 6/6. Strong, right? This is like a harmonic pop that you just get the best of both worlds. It costs 1 more mana, but you get the higher end of damage, and you get the higher end of the minion for 1 more mana. So I do think this is just a solid card that is the sort of thing that a control shaman deck is definitely interested in. And lastly, I forget if we talked about this last time. I think we did, but Minecart Cruiser. This is another like very strong. You know, if you have a deck that is full of elementals, really strong, right? A 4/5 rush for 3. As long as you are playing an elemental deck, boom. This is just a 4/5 rush for 3. If you are not, well, maybe overload, but as long as you get that early curve going, it is going to keep being a powerful curve with a really overstated rush minion on 3. So, but yeah, overall, a lot of cool shaman stuff. Definitely feels like elemental shaman and control shaman are sort of the directions this is taking us, and those are 2 decks I like. So I'm excited. Also, Frogstaff. All right, now let's talk about Warlock. I think last time we basically got a chance to talk about the trolley problem, which I'm going to bring up again as hilarious. We have solved the trolley problem by being able to hit both things. Haha. Next up, we have Disposal Assistant, a 2-cost 3/2. Battlecry and Death Rattle put a Barrel of Sludge at the bottom of your deck. Well, what's the Barrel of Sludge? Boom. Is a 2-cost Fell spell. When this is played, discarded, or destroyed, deal 3 damage to the lowest health enemy. So, obviously, putting this on the bottom of your deck doesn't necessarily seem like it's doing very much, but unsurprisingly, there are cards that can interact with it. Also, one thing that I think is worth noting, that there are cards that put the sludge in your hand, if I recall correctly, and that gives you powerful synergies with the discard mechanics that Warlock has. For instance, just looking back at the other card, Trolley Problem. Discard your lowest cost spell. Boom. If your lowest cost spell is a Barrel of Sludge, well, you get the effect of dealing damage to the lowest cost enemy. Haha! We've solved the trolley problem. We throw the sludge on them. But anyway, let's continue going and seeing more things. This is a Furnace Fuel 4-cost spell. When this is played, discarded, or destroyed, draw 2 cards. Again, things that synergize with the discard effects that exist within Warlock. We have not really seen much of this recently, so I do really like the sort of like piece those discard synergies together. And this is obviously a very powerful one, given that one of the things, if you are playing a discard deck and in particular, if you don't have necessarily a lot of the payoffs, having something that draws you additional cards can help quite a bit. Next we have Smokestack. This is a 1-cost Fell spell. Deal 1 damage to a minion. If it dies, excavate a treasure. Warlock, another of the excavate classes. Obviously this is kind of like a Mortal Coil, except instead of drawing a card, you're getting yourself a treasure. Another excavate card is the legendary Battlecry. If you've 7-cost 4/4, if you've excavated twice, summon 6 3/3 tram cards with Rush. This is very like Sociologist from the Soul Shard stuff. Being able to just have a 7-cost thing that makes a board full of stuff. This is obviously not keying off of like you've shuffled these into your deck, but rather that you get a board full of stuff from having done a couple of excavates. And Warlock, because it does have access to life tap, is not quite as good at Rogue because of Shadow Step and the specific cards that they get at being able to excavate a lot, but is able to dig through its deck to find its excavate cards likely a lot more effectively than other classes. Next up we have Moarg Drill Fist. 4-cost 4/5 Mech Demon Taunt with Death Rattle, excavate a treasure. So this is obviously just a efficient taunt minion, right? Like, we're not like necessarily thrilled by a 4-cost 4/5. Yeti has come and gone as a card that is likely to show up in decks, but obviously taunt is making it a lot more effective. Having 2 potentially relevant minion types as well, and then of course the Death Rattle, excavate a treasure. This is just a reasonable pile of stats that can keep you alive that comes with value. So what can you say no to there? Then we have Waste Remover. First of all, 4 mana 7/7. This one doesn't have overload. It has, at the end of your turn, destroy the bottom 3 cards of your deck. So in normal circumstances, if you didn't have anything that actually synergized with this in any meaningful way, you're just going to run out of deck pretty fast, right? This is not an upside unless you have things that you're putting on your bottom of your deck, like with the disposal assistant with those barrels of sludge. It is, until you have something that is going on the bottom of your deck that you want to destroy, destroying the bottom 3 cards of your deck is a downside because it makes you more likely to fatigue. But obviously, 4 mana 7/7 is fairly powerful. It is a demon, which is a relevant minion type, and can turn on those synergies, which this can help too. Sludge on Wheels. 3 cost 1/5 rush. Whenever this takes damage, get a barrel of sludge and add 1 to the bottom of your deck. Obviously, this one weirdly feels like it should be a mech. Like it's looks like it's a car, right? Like, is it just the sludge, the dude with the face? Regardless, this is another sort of synergy card for the sludge plan. You've got Toxic Waste Warlock as a deck that's coming together here. But being able to add the barrels of sludge to your deck to be able to use with the stuff that cares about discarding them, or maybe you want to get a bunch of barrels of sludge in your hand on the bottom of your deck, finley them, and then have something that makes you discard your hand and just nuke all your opponent's stuff. Anyway, next we have Fracking, another card that synergizes with those. Look at the bottom 3 cards of your deck, draw 1, and destroy the others. So this is, for one, a play on words of tracking, in case you didn't notice that. So tracking is normally just discover a card from your deck. You look at 3 cards from your deck. Old tracking was you destroy the other 2, right? This is basically old tracking because it specifically looks at the bottom 3 cards of your deck where you have potentially placed some sludge, and fracking, destroying the sludge, it usually actually just lets it into the atmosphere, and whatever else, which isn't good. But if you have the various synergistic stuff to be able to throw that sludge in the bottom of your deck, you can use this to not only get a card but also potentially nuke your opponent's minions or their face, because it is lowest health enemy period. So again, like if you happen to have a bunch of barrels of sludge in the bottom of your deck and then Finlead into Deathwing, boom, they're dead. And then last but not least, for regular cards, Popgar the Putrid. Your fell spells cost 1 less and have lifesteal. Battlecry, get 2 barrels of sludge. So a 4-cost 2/6 that gives you 2 of these that cost 1 and have lifesteal. That's actually pretty good, right? So obviously there are other fell spells in Warlock. This is more like I feel a barrel of sludge enabler, but it does work with Crescendo, which is a fell spell, which is a card that if you actually does Crescendo deal the damage to you and to your opponent? Because it's take damage equal to your fatigue. Will this with Crescendo, is the Crescendo doing the fatigue damage to you as well? So do you stay net neutral if you play this with Crescendo? I don't know, right? That's actually kind of an interesting question as to is that part of the effect? I imagine if you gave your baritone imp lifesteal, it wouldn't be net neutral, is my guess. But so it's probably pay life, and it doesn't actually give you the lifesteal off of it. But it's an interesting question, and certainly something I'm going to try and find out on day 1 of the expansion. But I do really like the sort of sludge warlock stuff. I think that it's very interesting. A lot of moving parts that you can aim to put together that have a variety of different possible synergies. Again, I think that stuff like the Disciple of Sargeras that discards a spell to make imps alongside it. That if you're getting barrels of sludge and don't have other imps, it's great. Now here we go. We're getting not a downside from this. We're getting an upside by nuking their stuff as well. But we did see that that Warlock is an excavate class, and they also have an excavate legendary, which is the Azurite Snake. 4 cost 5/5 elemental beast. Battlecry, your hero steals 10 health from the enemy hero. So this is a very powerful effect. And worth noting, this isn't just like they take 10, you gain 10. This is they lose 10 max health. So like if your opponent's playing Priest, right? It's like suddenly they can only heal to 20. You know? Uh, it's kind of gross. But overall, I think this is a really interesting card, and definitely worth like kind of trying to play toward. There's no like great ways like to easily copy this. You could play this with like Celestial Projectionist. You could play it with like Brewmaster-ish effects or whatever to try to get multiple copies of this effect to just like give them 0 max health or whatever. I think that's kind of funny. I am curious if your opponent is a warrior and they have like 40 armor and you Azurite Snake them 3 times, are they dead? Because if you have like a way to gain armor like in an effect but your health goes to 0 in the meantime, you will die. So I think that you can kill someone who has 60 armor or whatever by playing this thing 3 times, which is very cool to me. So yeah, I think this is a really interesting card, and building a deck that is already looking to like, potentially get multiple uses out of your excavation minions, that will give you additional application for those by getting multiple uses out of this, or just excavating, like multiple times, is very exciting. So I definitely am going to try that version of Warlock in addition to Sludge Warlock as well. Lastly, we have Warrior. And firstly, for Warrior, we have Badlands Brawler. This feels like an adventure card, right? Always wins Brawl, but this is a 7-cost 4/4. Battlecry, start a Brawl. If you've excavated twice, this always wins. So in an Excavate deck, considering this costs 7, this is almost certainly just 7-cost destroy all other minions. I guess there are worlds in which you will not have excavated twice by that point, but it's a pretty strong card, right? I don't know that it's necessarily like crazy powerful or anything, but because 7's a lot, and a lot of times you'd rather in a situation where you where you're looking to clear the board, you'd rather armor up after a brawl than have this. But it's basically it's Soul Stealer for 7 mana without the corpse benefit or whatever, which is a powerful effect, right? Warrior does have lots of board clear already, but I imagine that an Excavate Warrior deck is going to be more mid-rangey than Control, just based on like the sort of cards that we have seen. So being able to sort of pressure with the 4/4 and not have to rely on like having a big armor stack for them like Sanitize does seem like it could be relevant. Next, Unlucky Powder Man. I'm not really sure what the like thematic relationship is between an undead who blows himself up and giving your taunt minions +1/+1. But I am someone who has like tried to make Taunt Warrior work so many times. So many times. And this is something that I think can help do that, because this is a Keleseth, right? This is a Keleseth. You get to put 2 of them in your deck. And, like, obviously, your opponent could like silence it or whatever. But all of your minions getting +1/+1 basically on a 2-drop is real good. And taunt minions like generally do have a bit lower stats than other minions because, well, they have taunt to a positive, but being able to really accelerate them out alongside this and like having more stuff like later game like Armageddillo and things like that. It doesn't affect like your discover effects, like things like Training Session, that are the sort of card that you would typically play in a deck that's looking to play a bunch of taunts. Much less effective with this being what I feel like being one of the cornerstone cards for your deck. But certainly something that I'm going to experiment with when it is available. Next up, we have Misfire. Deal 3, 2, and 1 damage to random minions. Quick draw, choose the targets. This is kind of just like Minefield, right? Minefield was a very heavily played card back in like Boom's day, and this does more damage. So I think it's just a good card for like a Control Warrior style deck that is just gonna like blow up things, right? If you're looking to play like Control Warrior, it just kills a lot of stuff real quick. If there are, granted there need to be like matchups where you really care about that, right? Like, and you already have stuff like Bellowing Flames. Are there like better options for this? Unclear. rather or better options. This is a better option than anything. I guess what I'm trying to say. But I do think the effect is powerful. It's just a matter of like how much removal do you need, and is there not enough already? Which I don't know. Is it better than Blade Storm? Maybe it's better than Blade Storm. Blade Storm is very good against individual large minions or like a couple of really big minions that happen to be the same size. But it really just sort of depends on the mid game. If there's like a lot of early game pressure, this card is great. Next we have Blast Charge. 3 cost destroy a damaged enemy minion, excavate a treasure. This is execute. You're paying 2 mana to excavate a treasure on a card that like already isn't really played. So this your opponent has to have a damaged enemy minion to play it at all, right? Like I kind of wonder if I mean maybe you can just play this with nothing, but my guess is you can't, right? I don't know. This just feels bad. Like it feels like you need if you're playing a deck that with excavate, it feels like having it like not only is the card inefficient, but it also requires your opponent to have like a specific thing, right? Like it just feels quite weak to me. I feel like this card is really underwhelming. And frankly, like given that all the excavate stuff wants you to, it's very parasitic, right? You want to play a bunch of excavate stuff together because all of it makes the rest of it better. That makes me feel like there is likely to be or rather there's unlikely to be a particularly impressive excavate warrior deck. Simply because like their stuff seems a little bit underpowered, but maybe just warriors, armor gain and the ability to like naturally play a longer game better than most classes will make the even like less efficient excavate better for them. Next we have Battle Pickaxe, a 4/1 weapon. After you play a taunt minion, gain +1 durability. I like this in theory. There being like hey, if you keep playing taunt minions, you can keep using this weapon. I just kind of wish it was like a 3/2 to start rather than a 4/1 to start. Because spending 3 mana and like not being able to like swing your weapon feels a little rough to me, right? Like you're spending your mana and like you don't get a use of it, and then it's like, okay, now you have to play a taunt minion in order to like be able to swing it at all. Feels awkward to me. Like maybe like you play this with like is the 3/3 taunt that's reduced in cost by your by the highest power or the attacking weapon, right? I don't think that's currently in standard. Dread Corsair, is it in standard? If Dread Corsair is in standard, then it's very different, right? If Dread Corsair is in standard, being able to like play this into Dread Corsair ends up being like actually really effective. But outside of that, this card feels quite weak. So maybe Dread Corsair is kind of the key to making this card work. Next we have Slagmaw the Slumbering. 16/16 for 4. You thought that a 4-mana 7/7 was big as it gets, but Rush Taunt, dormant for 8 turns. Excavate to awaken 2 turns sooner. So talking about like the excavate stuff for warrior, this is certainly a powerful payoff if you have a ton of excavate stuff. But like this mostly reads as I think Meaty said on Twitter, 4-mana 16/16 dormant until next game. Similarly, like you have to have the excavate cards to make this remotely good. And you also have to like have targets for them, right? Like because the blast charge requires a damaged enemy minion to work at all, right? Like it makes it even harder to be able to use Slagmaw because Slagmaw, like will just kind of sit there and do nothing without your ability to cast your excavate cards. So that I think like I kind of keep coming back to blast charge as like a real hole in the excavate warrior strategy. I wonder if the ability to just cast blast charge if you wanted to could be like excavate a treasure you may destroy a damaged enemy minion or something like that could leave us in a better spot for it. But as of now, I feel like largely because of blast charge and the condition, how conditional it is to have your excavate cards work, this card is pretty unlikely to be that effective. All right, next up we have Blast Tortoise. This is the better blast card in here. A 2/7 taunt for 6 with Battle Cry. Deal damage to all enemy minions equal to this minion's attack. This card is awesome. There's things like Armageddillo, things like the Blast dude, whatever his name is, the Unlucky Powder Man. This is very easily a just huge AoE attached to a big body. Obviously 6 is a lot of mana for that. And it requires, yeah, you got to build up to it, right? You need to have things that are buffing either from your hand or buff it when it hits the board. But I think this is just a very strong card against any kind of minion based strategy. The real question is always not, or rather, the real question is usually how does this Taunt Warrior deck beat anything that isn't a minion deck? This is obviously, if your opponent's playing a bunch of minions, playing a bunch of big taunt minions, you're usually in pretty good shape anyway. So it's possible that because of that, this actually isn't that impressive a card because your opponent's just gonna be like, if in the matchup where you're already good, it's just powerful. In the matchup where it's bad, it's terrible, right? So that kind of might be the question of that's more relevant, right? Is can we beat stuff like Rainbow Mage? That at least is good against the Elemental Invocation, though. Next up, we have Detonation Juggernaut. It seems like exploding is how taunt minions get better. Unclear why. Anyway, 5 cost, 3/6 taunt with Battle Cry. Give your taunt minion in your hand +2/+2. So more ways to make your taunt minions get big. And obviously, as we talked about, the Unlucky Powder Man is another. So we have a lot of stuff that scales our taunt minions. Will any of this be good? Unclear, right? Like a lot of these rely on like, hey, I play an expensive minion with taunt. Does my opponent care? Right? Like, do they just have silence effects? Do they just have, stuff that ignores my board? That I think is all kind of, again, like the real operative question for whether Taunt Warrior can be good. And I think it's still very much up in the air. Next up, we have Reinforced Plating. 3 cost, gain 6 armor, excavate a treasure. I mean, again, I feel like the Warrior excavate cards feel like they're on like the low end of power. 6 armor, excavate treasure. This is kind of like a shield block, and shield block got buffed to 2 mana, right? Like I don't know if this is. It just feels like there are specific class specific excavate cards are just like kind of unimpressive to me. There's only the 2 of them, right? There's Blast Charge in this, and neither of them really feel like they are great return on the rate you're paying. And I just wonder if they're just not enough, right? Again, like maybe Warrior, because it just naturally is a control class, has the tools to play like a longer game, building up armor, being able to excavate a bunch to make it work. But I remain skeptical because this is pretty inefficient, and Blast Charge is conditional and inefficient, which just kind of leaves us in a bad spot. And lastly, for real cards, we have Boom Boss Thogran. Battlecry, shuffle 3 TNT into your deck. When drawn, blow up a card in the enemy hand, deck, and battlefield. This card's cool. I don't think this card's actually very good. 8 is a lot of mana, right? This is an 8 mana card that by itself does nothing on the board, and you have to draw into these other cards. Whoa. You have to draw into these other cards, and then it just hits random stuff. It can't remove it can't remove dormants or like locate. Well, it can remove locations because that's a card on the board, but it can't remove like a Sargeras portal. It can't remove like the nest that the card that I revealed, Registraza, I forget. But anyway, the druid dragon portal can't remove that. I mean, it's like a patchworkish thing, but like doesn't necessarily hit minions. It hits random cards, which is cool, but also means you're less likely to hit like a key minion against something like a Sith, right? And yeah, like the fact that it's 8 mana, worse than War Golem, like stat wise, isn't doing anything that hits play. Like if you're gonna spend 8 mana and do something that's just like, I am planning for the future. In Warrior, you have Odin, right? You have Odin, and you can just beat them up rather than like playing this and then just kind of hoping that you disrupt them. So I think it's cool. I just don't think it's going to be good. I wish it was because I like the effect. I think it's neat and it gives you kind of an alternate way to go about like trying to play a controlling warrior deck by like sort of attritioning them with blowing up stuff in their hand and deck, in like a more interesting way than just run them out of stuff. But this coming like pretty much immediately after Odin, means that I just don't see it realistically seeing play. And lastly, we have, boom, the Azurite Ox. This is the Warrior Excavate Legendary. 4 cost 5/5 battle cry. Discover 2 8-cost minions. Summon them. So this is obviously very powerful, much like all of the legendary Excavate cards. But as I mentioned throughout the Warrior section, the Warrior Excavate cards seem bad, right? Like paying 3 mana for an Execute, paying 3 mana for a shield block, and you only have those 2 within the class, right? Those are, unless I missed something, which I don't think I did, Warrior had the correct number of cards. They have fewer Excavate cards than many of the other classes, and also worse ones. It just feels like, It's hard to get excited about excavating in Warrior, especially when you already have such a powerful, like, long game controlling strategy in Warrior, such as Odin. So I am skeptical. I am highly, highly skeptical that Excavate Warrior is likely to go anywhere, because both the the enablers and the payoffs just don't seem that amazing, right? Like, this is obviously a powerful card, but it just kind of puts some stats into play. And if you're playing like a controlling deck, you're probably, your opponent, if they're playing, also playing any kind of controlling deck that you actually got to that point, they probably have ways to kill your big stuff that you put into play. But otherwise, it's like, okay. And like, you're discovering them and summoning them, so you can't, like, if you get, like, say the TNT guy, you don't get the battle cry. If you get like Odin, you don't get the battle cry. So you're not, it's just not that exciting, right? So I'm a little let down overall by the Excavate package in Warrior. It both just, like, it feels underwhelming. The other classes that have Excavate stuff all feel like they are doing cool things and have cool payoffs. And Warrior, I mean, this Azurite Ox, it's fine, but like, their tools to get there seem so much worse than the other classes that it seems really difficult to justify playing them. But that is not our final card. Even though that is the final card of the final class, we have Reno Lone Ranger. So this is, I think, probably the most wildly interesting card in the set. Like, it is a neutral hero card. And I talked a bit about this when we talked about the Paladin Legendary, but I've seen people be like, this card is, ridiculous, it's so broken, blah, blah, blah. And yes, when you play this card, it is outrageously powerful. It is, an 8-cost hero with Battle Cry. If your deck has no duplicates, empty the enemy board and limit it to 1 minion for a turn. It's high noon. I do appreciate that they have the flavor text just, like, on the ability to, like, explain what the hell this means. But so yeah, this, remember old Reno, the amazing Reno that was like 10 cost, poof, all minions go away. This is basically that, but it also hits other things. This is empty the enemy board. So not only do their minions go away, but even their otherwise uninteractable stuff goes away. Their locations go away. Their Sargeras portal goes away. All of the big, normally, like, sacrosanct, can't possibly do anything about this, it goes away. It is also one-sided. It empties the enemy board. Your stuff, fine. Your stuff just stays. It doesn't actually do anything to your board. So it's a little bit weird that you have this showdown with one thing with your entire posse. Doesn't seem fair. And then you limit them to 1 minion the next turn. So they can't even reload with a bunch of stuff. They can go like, all right, I got a guy. All right. And then also you get a hero power. I don't actually have all the hero powers pulled up, and I'm not going to put all of them up on the board, but they're basically every spell type. It's a rotating bullet with a bonus effect. And they're things like, draw a card, refresh, your mana crystals, like, other various bonus things. And they're all good. Like, they're all powerful. But yeah, this is, I think this card clearly is nuts, right? It's clearly a wildly, wildly powerful card. But as I mentioned, like I said a little bit earlier, as I mentioned when I was talking about the Paladin Highlander card, it's asking a lot to play a Highlander deck. You're getting, a lot of reduced consistency as well as overall reduced power level, because you're playing kind of second fiddle style cards in a lot of slots. And you need something kind of wild in order to make, it worth playing a Highlander deck. And this is wild, right? This is super, super, super powerful. And I think like you're gonna see, because this is such a unique effect, you'll see like interesting standoffs and interesting interpretations of figuring out what someone's deck is. Because like once you realize your opponent's a Highlander deck, you need to keep Reno in mind all the time, right? Like it used to be like, okay, maybe they're a Reno deck, and I need to think about this. It's like, well, if your opponent's playing a Reno deck, this style of Reno deck, you probably want to wait until they play this before you play your Sargeras, right? Because then they can't poof it once they've already played their Lone Ranger. Just things like that, like you can have these interesting like sort of standoffs of like, I'm going to try to apply enough pressure to get you to use this before I play the thing that your opponent can't possibly remove otherwise. It's also worth noting that if this card is super good, well, you could just play plagues. Plagues are duplicate cards, right? If you Hellier your opponent, if you swing at them like 3 times with the weapon or whatever, sorry, your Highlander deck doesn't work. I imagine most Highlander decks will end up playing Steam Cleaner as a result of that, just sort of as an insurance policy, and maybe even like Steam Cleaner in the deck and Steam Cleaner in an ETC or something like that. But like you need to have. It's great that there are some form of answers, but it's great that you have answers to the answers. But yeah, very very interesting card, super strong, and gives every class, even if they don't have their own Highlander Legendary, a reason to consider trying to build a Highlander deck, or at least trying to include this in a deck with enough card draw that it can support it, and like have the opportunity cost of like, okay, well, I have some Highlander-ish cards and some duplicates and all that, which all of it I think makes deck building in Hearthstone much more interesting. And I'm excited to both play with this card and more so to build decks with this card because I think it is a very, very interesting challenge. Overall, super, super excited for Showdown in the Badlands. There's all kinds of really neat stuff from Reno all the way down. I love Highlander style decks, and I feel like, you know, having really powerful support like that will enable me to feel like I'm not just an idiot for playing them, and also likely encourage people who are less less excited about their games being wildly different from one another. Give it a shot and find out how fun it is. So, anyway, I hope you all enjoyed this look at Showdown in the Badlands. Curious what your thoughts are on what the best cards is and the cards that you're most excited about. So let me know in the comments. I will be playing Showdown in the Badlands during the theory crafting stream on Thursday, the what, 8th? No, 8th is tomorrow, the 9th. Thursday the 9th. I'll be doing theory crafting all day and getting to play with some of these cards for the first time, so be sure to tune in then. Otherwise, thanks for watching, and I will see you in the Badlands. I missed.